Big Shaq woke up early that morning with a big smile on his face. For weeks, he had been thinking about this day. He had worked hard, saved every penny he could, and finally, he was ready to step into the dealership and see the car he had dreamed of for so long. His heart was racing with excitement. He imagined himself sitting behind the wheel, holding the steering tightly and driving out with the world watching him. It was not just about buying a car. For him, it was about showing himself that he could achieve something that once felt impossible. He dressed carefully before leaving his house. He put on his favorite jacket, cleaned his sneakers, and made sure he looked presentable. He knew that dealerships were full of shiny cars and people who came in wearing expensive clothes. He didn't want to look out of place, but he also wanted to stay true to himself. Big Shaq was always confident in who he was, and today he carried that confidence proudly. As he walked towards the dealership, his steps were steady but full of energy. The glass doors of the showroom shone under the sunlight, making the place look almost magical. The building itself was tall and polished, with bright cars parked outside as if they were waiting to be chosen. Shaq slowed down for a moment, taking a deep breath. He thought about the long nights he had worked, the struggles he had faced, and the times people doubted him. All of that had brought him here. He whispered to himself, "Today is my day." When he finally stepped through the doors, the sound of his shoes echoed on the shiny floor. The showroom was huge, filled with brand new cars, each one sparkling as if it had just come out of a dream. The smell of fresh leather and polished paint filled the air. Salespeople were walking around in sharp suits, greeting customers with practiced smiles. Some people were already sitting with managers, signing papers, while others carefully inspected the cars. The whole place buzzed with activity. Shaq's eyes widened with wonder. For a moment, he felt like a little kid walking into a candy store. Every car looked perfect, sleek designs, shining colors, and powerful engines. He could almost hear the engines roar, even though they stood silent on display. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the details, the curves of the cars, the polished wheels, the luxurious interiors. He knew he had come a long way, and now he was ready to make his choice. But as Shaq looked around with excitement, he noticed something else. Not everyone was looking at him with a smile. Some customers gave him quick glances, as if trying to guess whether he belonged there. A couple whispered softly, their eyes following him with curiosity. And then, there was the dealership manager. Standing near the reception desk, the manager's sharp eyes landed on Shaq the moment he entered. Unlike the salespeople who greeted others warmly, the manager's expression was stiff, almost cold. Shaq felt the weight of that stare, but decided to ignore it. He wasn't going to let anyone's look ruin his moment. He straightened his back and walked further into the showroom. He stopped by a sleek black car that had always been his favorite model. The shine of the paint reflected his face as he leaned in closer. He ran his hand gently over the smooth surface, smiling to himself. He could almost see himself driving it down the street, the wind rushing past and people turning to watch. He waved at one of the salesmen and asked politely about the car. The salesman seemed surprised for a moment, but quickly nodded and began explaining the features. Shaq listened carefully, asking questions, showing genuine interest. He wanted to know everything before making a choice. The excitement in his eyes was clear, and for him, this was one of the happiest moments in his life. But behind him, the manager still watched with suspicion. The manager whispered something to another staff member, who looked at Shaq with the same doubtful expression. They seemed to be judging him, as if he didn't deserve to be there. Still, Shaq kept his focus on the cars. He had promised himself not to be distracted. Minutes passed, and Shaq moved from one car to another, carefully examining the details. His heart raced every time he imagined sitting behind the wheel. To him, this was more than a car, it was proof of his hard work and a reward for his struggles. People might see just another customer walking through the dealership. But for Shaq, it was the beginning of something he had dreamed about for years. As he stood there, looking at the cars with shining eyes, he didn't know that this visit was about to change everything. What started as a simple day to buy a car would soon turn into a story no one could forget. The looks, the whispers, and the cold stare of the manager were signs of something coming. Shaq was unaware that within a short time, his joy would clash with something darker. And the whole dealership would witness a shocking moment that would go far beyond buying a car. For now, though, Big Shaq was still full of hope. He believed that this was his moment of victory, a chapter he had worked so hard to reach. He smiled, touched the hood of the car once again, and whispered, "This is it. This is my time." Big Shaq had been walking around the showroom for nearly 15 minutes, looking at cars one by one. He listened to the sales assistant, nodded, and asked small questions about the engines, mileage, and designs. His voice was calm, but inside he felt his heart beating faster. Every time he leaned closer to a shiny car, he imagined himself taking it for a ride, his friends cheering as he drove past them. He felt like a winner already. But that feeling would not last long. As Shaq bent down to look inside a bright red sports car, a shadow fell over him. He slowly stood up and saw the dealership manager standing only a few feet away. The man's arms were crossed tightly against his chest, his jaw stiff, and his eyes filled with doubt. The sales assistant stopped speaking, mid-sentence, as the manager's sharp voice cut through the air. "Are you seriously looking to buy this car?" the manager asked, his tone full of disbelief. Shaq blinked, taken aback. "Of course, that's why I'm here." His voice was steady, but he could feel the stares of other customers nearby. The manager smirked slightly, as if Shaq had just told a joke. "Do you even know how much this model costs? It's not for everyone." His words were loud enough for people around them to hear. A couple standing near a silver SUV turned their heads, whispering quietly to each other. Shaq tried to remain calm. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't know," he replied. His eyes fixed firmly on the manager. The tension in the air grew thicker. The friendly mood Shaq had carried with him began to fade. He could feel embarrassment slowly creeping in, but he reminded himself not to lose control. This was his day, his dream. The manager, however, didn't stop. He walked closer, his polished shoes clicking against the showroom floor. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice but keeping the same sharp edge, "we don't have time for people who only want to waste it. These cars are meant for serious buyers. Maybe you should look elsewhere." Shaq's jaw tightened. He knew what the manager was suggesting. He didn't belong there. The words stung like poison, but Shaq refused to let them break him. He inhaled slowly and answered, "I am a serious buyer. All I asked for was some information." For a brief moment, the room fell silent. Even the sales assistant didn't know what to say. Other customers pretended to keep browsing, but their ears were clearly tuned to the growing argument. Shaq felt dozens of eyes on him. The manager's lips curled into a half smile, though there was nothing kind about it. "All right then," he said, his tone almost mocking. "Why don't you tell me which car you think you can afford?" The insult hung in the air. Shaq felt a fire ignite inside him. He could feel heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself not to explode. He looked the manager straight in the eyes and said calmly, "The one I choose will be the one I can afford." A murmur rippled through the showroom. Some customers were impressed by Shaq's courage, while others shook their heads nervously, waiting for what would happen next. The manager stepped back slightly, but didn't drop his glare. He had expected Shaq to back down, to walk away quietly. But Shaq's calm strength irritated him even more. He wanted to prove a point, to make Shaq feel small. The sales assistant tried to break the tension. "Sir, maybe we should continue." Looking at the features, "This model enough," the manager snapped, cutting him off. His voice was sharp and angry now. He turned his full attention back to Shaq. "Don't waste my staff's time. People like you don't walk out of here with cars like these, so stop pretending." Those words hit harder than any punch. The insult was open now, without any disguise. Shaq felt his fists tighten at his sides. For a second, he imagined shouting back, or storming out, or even pushing the manager aside. But then, deep inside, he reminded himself of something. He had faced worse in his life. He had been underestimated, insulted, and ignored before. And every single time, he had risen stronger. So instead of reacting with anger, Shaq gave a slow smile. It wasn't a happy smile, it was a dangerous one, the kind that meant he wasn't going anywhere. "Oh, you'll see soon enough," he said, quietly, almost in a whisper, but loud enough for the manager to hear. The manager's expression hardened. He didn't like that answer. He didn't like the confidence in Shaq's voice. For him, this wasn't just about a customer anymore. It was about pride, control, and power. And in his eyes, Shaq had just challenged him. The air in the dealership grew heavier. Sales assistants looked at each other nervously. Customers whispered louder, and Shaq stood tall, refusing to be broken. He had walked in with dreams, but now he realized something else. This wasn't just about buying a car anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and proving to everyone in that room that he belonged. What started as an exciting day had turned into the first clash of something much bigger. Shaq didn't know it yet. But this was only the beginning of a storm that would shake the entire dealership. The silence in the dealership felt heavy, as if the air itself had frozen. Big Shaq stood tall, refusing to move, but the tension was written all over his face. He had come here with excitement and dreams, but now every step he had taken inside seemed to lead him into a darker storm. The manager paced slowly around him, his eyes never leaving Shaq, like a predator circling its prey. The polished floor reflected the manager's sharp movements, each step echoing like a drumbeat. People nearby stopped pretending to look at cars. Their eyes were glued to the unfolding scene. Phones quietly slid out of pockets, ready to record. Something told them this moment would be worth capturing. The manager finally stopped right in front of Shaq. His voice, dripping with arrogance, cut through the room. "Look around you," he said, waving his hand at the rows of shiny cars. "Do you see these machines? They are for real customers. Men and women who can actually afford them. Not for clowns who walk in pretending like they belong here." The word clown stung harder than a slap. Gasps filled the room, and whispers ran through the crowd like a spark on dry grass. Big Shaq's jaw tightened, his knuckles stiffening by his sides. He wanted to respond, but something inside him told him to hold his tongue. The manager wasn't finished. He leaned closer, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at your shoes, look at your jacket. Do you think anyone in this place believes you came here to buy? You're just wasting my staff's time. You should leave before you embarrass yourself even more." The insult hit like a knife. Shaq could feel every eye in the room burning into him. Some people shook their heads in disgust, not at him, but at the cruelty of the manager's words. Others looked away, too uncomfortable to watch, but a few smirked, enjoying the humiliation as if it were free entertainment. Shaq's chest rose and fell as he fought to control his breathing. Memories of past struggles flashed in his mind, nights when people doubted him, moments when he was judged for how he looked, times when he was told he wasn't good enough. This moment felt like all of that crashing down in one place. But instead of breaking, Shaq locked eyes with the manager. His stare was calm, steady, and unshaken. Inside, he burned with anger. But outside, he showed only strength. That calmness annoyed the manager even more. The manager smirked and delivered his final blow. "Tell me," he said, raising his voice, so everyone could hear. "Do you even have the money for a down payment? Or are you just here to touch the cars you'll never own?" Laughter rippled through a small group at the back. The insult was complete. The manager had stripped away every shred of respect he could, turning Shaq into the center of humiliation. For a brief second, Shaq closed his eyes. He imagined himself walking out, leaving the dealership behind, forgetting everything. But then, another thought hit him. If he left now, it wouldn't just be walking away from the dealership, he'd be walking away from his dignity. That was something he couldn't do. He opened his eyes again, his stare sharper than before. He didn't shout, he didn't curse. Instead, in a calm but powerful voice, he said, "Respect is not something you give based on clothes or money. Respect is something every person deserves. Remember that?" The room went silent again. Even those who had laughed earlier felt the weight of Shaq's words. His voice carried more strength than any insult the manager could throw. But the manager's pride was wounded. His face turned red, and his jaw clenched in anger. Instead of backing down, he stepped even closer, his voice trembling with rage. "Get out," he barked. "Get out now before I throw you out myself." Shaq didn't move. His stillness was louder than words, and that only fueled the manager's fury. The stage was set for something far bigger than just insults. The crowd could sense it. Their phones were raised higher now, cameras recording every second. What had begun as an insult was about to explode into something shocking, and in that charged moment, everyone understood this was no longer about cars. It was about pride, dignity, and a storm that was seconds away from breaking loose. The tension in the dealership had reached a breaking point. The room was silent, but that silence was dangerous, like the pause before thunder splits the sky. Big Shaq stood tall, refusing to move, while the manager's face turned red with fury. Every second felt heavier, as if the whole dealership was holding its breath. The manager's eyes narrowed, his anger boiling over. "I said, get out." He barked, his voice echoing against the glass walls. But Shaq didn't budge. His calm defiance was more powerful than shouting, and that defiance felt like an insult to the manager's authority. A murmur rippled through the crowd of customers and staff. People leaned forward, their phones lifted higher to record the moment. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Then it did, in one sudden, shocking move. The manager shoved Shaq hard against the chest. The push was strong enough to make him stumble back a step. The crowd gasped, some covering their mouths in disbelief. Shaq steadied himself, his fists clenching at his sides, but he didn't strike back. His silence was louder than any punch, and that only made the manager angrier. "Don't test me," the manager shouted, his voice shaking with rage. He stepped forward again, this time raising his hand. And before anyone could stop him, he swung. His fist connected with Shaq's jaw in a loud, sickening crack. The sound echoed across the dealership. Like a gunshot, the room erupted. Some people screamed. Others shouted at the manager to stop. A child clutched his mother's arm, frightened by the sudden violence. The sales assistants froze, their faces pale with shock, unsure whether to interfere or stay out of it. Shaq's head turned slightly from the force of the punch. Pain shot through his jaw, but he did not fall. He stood firm, his eyes locked on the manager, his face calm, but his body tense like a storm held back by chains. He could have fought back, everyone expected him to. But he didn't. That choice alone left the room in stunned silence. But the manager wasn't done. Fueled by pride and anger, he barked at the security guards nearby. "Throw him out. Now." The guards hesitated for a moment. They looked at Shaq, then at the furious manager. They didn't want to touch him, but the manager's glare was enough to push them into action. Two guards rushed forward, grabbing Shaq by his arms. The crowd booed, some yelling, "That's not right." Others shouted, "Leave him alone." Shaq didn't resist. He let the guards drag him across the shiny showroom floor, his shoes squeaking with every step. The humiliation was sharp, but his silence carried more dignity than any argument could. Phones recorded every second, capturing the unfairness, the violence, the raw humiliation. When they reached the glass doors, the guards swung them open and shoved Shaq outside. He stumbled onto the pavement, falling to one knee before slowly standing up again. His jacket was wrinkled, his jaw ached, but his spirit was unbroken. Behind him, the manager shouted from the doorway, his voice loud enough for everyone inside and outside to hear. "Don't you ever come back here again. This place is not for you." His words were dripping with arrogance and venom. The doors slammed shut, the sound ringing like the final word of a cruel sentence. Inside, the dealership buzzed with chaos, customers shouting, staff panicking, and cameras still recording. Outside, Shaq stood tall, the cool air hitting his bruised face, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. For a moment, he just stood there, looking back through the glass at the man who had humiliated him. The crowd inside was still watching. They saw not just a man thrown out, but a man who had refused to break, even when hit. Shaq's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw notifications flooding in already. The videos were being uploaded, shared, and spread like wildfire. What had happened inside wasn't going to stay inside. The world was already watching. Shaq lifted his head high. He didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't give the manager the reaction he wanted. Instead, he walked slowly away from the dealership, his back straight, his steps heavy but strong. Every person outside who had seen the scene unfold stared at him with a mix of pity, anger, and admiration. They knew this wasn't the end. Something about the way he carried himself promised more to come, and deep inside, Shaq knew it too. He whispered under his breath, so quietly only he could hear, This is not over." The explosion had happened, the shove, the punch, the humiliation, but the real storm was just beginning. The manager thought he had won, that he had thrown Shaq out for good. But in truth, he had awakened something far more powerful, the strength of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The glass doors of the dealership closed behind Big Shaq with a loud slam. But the story didn't end there. What had happened inside those shiny walls was already spilling out into the world, faster than anyone in that building could imagine. The customers who had witnessed the scene were buzzing with shock. Some were furious, shaking their heads at the cruelty they had just seen. Others were too stunned to speak, but their phones were still raised, recording every second. Dozens of clips captured the moment, the shove, the punch, the humiliation of being dragged out like a criminal. And in the digital age, a story like this doesn't stay hidden. Within minutes, the first video went online. A young woman who had filmed the whole thing uploaded it to her social media page with the caption, "Unbelievable. This car dealership manager just punched a man for no reason. Watch this." The video was less than 30 seconds long, but it carried enough fire to ignite the internet. In less than an hour, it was everywhere. On Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the clips spread like wildfire. People commented in outrage, their words pouring in faster than the servers could. "Keep up. Disgusting behavior." One wrote, "How dare they treat someone like that?" said another. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag justice for Shaq. Hashtag car dealer shame. Hashtag respect everyone. Big Shaq himself didn't even check his phone at first. He stood outside the dealership, leaning against a lamppost, his jaw aching from the punch, but his mind strangely calm. A few passers-by recognized him from the video already, pointing and whispering. Some even approached him, asking if he was okay. Shaq nodded, quietly, but he said little. His silence carried a power that made people lean in closer, wanting to hear his side of the story. By late afternoon, news reporters were outside the dealership. Camera vans lined the street, microphones were shoved toward anyone willing to talk. And journalists repeated the same question. Why did this happen? Who is the man in the video? The dealership manager, hiding inside his office, shut the blinds and refused to answer. The once busy showroom now felt like a cage under a spotlight. Every move watched by the public eye. Inside, employees whispered nervously. They knew the manager had crossed the line, but they were too afraid to speak out. The sales assistants who had stood frozen during the fight now wished they had done something. Every minute that passed, the dealership's reputation sank deeper. Into the mud, meanwhile, the videos continued to grow. One clip passed 10 million views before midnight. Influencers reacted to it. News channels replayed it on live broadcasts, and even celebrities commented on the shocking footage. Everyone had an opinion, and almost everyone was on Shaq's side. The public saw him as more than just a man thrown out. They saw him as a symbol of dignity. Someone who refused to fight back even when struck. In living rooms across the city, people watched the video and shook their heads in disbelief. Parents used it as a lesson to their children, saying, "This is why respect matters." Strangers wrote posts calling Shaq a hero for staying calm under pressure. Petitions started circulating online, demanding the dealership fire the manager. Immediately, Shaq finally sat down on a bench near his home later that evening and scrolled through his phone. His notifications were endless, thousands of messages, comments, and tags. Friends he hadn't spoken to in years reached out, telling him they had seen the video. Some sent words of encouragement, others told him he had inspired them. He watched. One of the clips himself, the shaky phone camera capturing the exact moment the manager's fist hit his face. He winced at the memory, but he also saw something else. He saw the way he stood tall afterward, refusing to fall, refusing to retaliate. That image wasn't just his anymore, it belonged to everyone watching. Shaq put the phone down and leaned back. Staring at the night sky, he realized that what had felt like humiliation in the moment had now become something bigger. The whole world was watching, and they weren't just watching a fight, they were watching a story. His story. Back at the dealership, the manager's phone rang non-stop. Calls from corporate offices, from lawyers, from furious executives who saw their brand being dragged through the mud. He slammed his desk in frustration, but deep inside, he knew the damage was done. No matter what excuse he gave, the video told the truth. And while the manager hid in shame, Shaq was becoming something unexpected. A voice for people who had been disrespected, doubted, or treated unfairly. He didn't plan it, but it was happening. Every view, every share, every comment was building him into something larger than life. The world was watching and waiting. Everyone wanted to know, what would Big Shaq do next? Would he sue the dealership? Would he fight back? Or would he rise in a way no one expected? The silence before the answer only made the curiosity grow stronger. What started as a private humiliation had now turned into a public movement. Big Shaq was no longer just a customer looking for a car. He was the man at the center of a storm the whole world couldn't look away from. The next morning, the city woke up still buzzing with the video. Everywhere people went, coffee shops, buses, offices, screens lit up with the clip of the dealership fight. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone wanted to talk about it. But there was one voice missing from all the noise. Big Shaq's. Reporters camped outside his small apartment, cameras, waiting for him to appear. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering about the sudden fame that had landed in their quiet street. Social media was drowning with questions. Why isn't he saying anything? What will Shaq do now? Is he going to sue them? But Shaq remained silent. He sat by his window, watching the crowd of reporters below. His jaw still ached from the punch, and a faint bruise had begun to form, but he didn't complain. Instead, he sipped his tea slowly, his eyes thoughtful. He wasn't afraid of speaking, he simply didn't want to rush. Words once spoken couldn't be taken back, and right now, silence was louder than anything he could say. Down on the street, a journalist shouted, "Shaq, do you have a statement?" "Do you plan to take legal action?" another added. "Millions are supporting you online. Do you want to send them a message?" But Shaq didn't answer. He looked at them once, gave a small nod, then turned away. The cameras clicked rapidly, but they captured only his quiet strength. That silence drove people crazy. Some thought it meant he was planning something big behind the scenes. Others believed he was too shocked to respond. The mystery turned him into an even bigger figure online. Memes appeared overnight. Shaq sitting calmly while the world screamed around him. Shaq standing tall while chaos unfolded. His silence became a symbol proof that sometimes dignity speaks louder than anger. Inside his home, Shaq replayed the events in his mind. The shove, the punch, the humiliation, all of it burned in his memory. But he also remembered the eyes of the crowd, the phones raised high, and the whispers of strangers who had supported him. He knew he wasn't alone anymore. The world was with him, but what should he do with that support? That was the question haunting him. His phone buzzed nonstop with calls from lawyers, journalists, and even influencers who wanted to collaborate. Some promised him fame. Others promised money. But Shaq ignored most of them. He didn't care about quick fame or easy headlines. He cared about something deeper: respect. And respect wasn't something you begged for. It was something you proved. At night, Shaq walked quietly through the city streets with a hoodie pulled over his head. People recognized him even in the shadows. Some came up, shaking his hand, thanking him for standing tall in the face of disrespect. One elderly man gripped his arm tightly and said, "Son, you showed us what dignity looks like." Shaq only smiled in reply, his silence carrying more meaning than words could. Meanwhile, the dealership struggled. The manager's face was plastered across every news channel, and the company's headquarters received endless complaints. Yet, the man himself refused to apologize. He told his staff he'll disappear in a week. These things always fade. But the opposite was happening. With every day Shaq stayed silent, the story grew bigger, not smaller. The media tried to fill the silence with their own theories. Some said Shaq was negotiating a massive lawsuit. Others claimed he was preparing a public statement that would destroy the dealership's reputation. The truth was simpler. Shaq was waiting for the right moment, the right move, the one that would matter most. His friends asked him, "Why aren't you speaking up?" "Everyone's ready to fight for you." Shaq only replied, "Because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Let them wonder. Let them talk." And he was right. The longer he stayed quiet, the more people leaned in to listen. His silence became the center of the storm. It wasn't weakness. It was power. People began to admire him, not just for surviving the punch, but for refusing to let anger control him afterward. By the end of the week, the world was desperate for an answer. News anchors ended their shows asking, "What will Big Shaq say?" Trending hashtags counted down every day of his silence. Crowds outside his home grew larger, their chants echoing into the night. "Shaq, Shaq, tell us your side." But inside, he remained calm. He wrote in his notebook, planned his thoughts, and waited for the perfect moment. When he finally spoke, he wanted it to matter. He wanted it to be unforgettable. And so, as the world screamed for his voice, Big Shaq gave them something stronger. Silence. A silence so powerful it held millions of people in suspense. A silence that promised one thing when he finally broke it. His next move would not just surprise them. It would stun them all. Asterisk, the silence couldn't last forever. For days, Big Shaq had let the world talk, let the rumors swirl, let the pressure build. And then, one crisp morning, when the city least expected it, he made his move. The dealership had just opened for the day. The glass doors gleamed under the sunlight, but the showroom inside was anything but cheerful. The once busy place now felt heavy, weighed down by bad publicity and angry customers. Many refused to step inside, and those who did only came to point fingers at the staff, demanding answers. Employees whispered nervously behind their desks, afraid of another scandal. And then the moment came. A black car pulled up slowly to the front. The doors opened and out stepped Big Shaq. But this time, he wasn't dressed in his usual casual jacket and sneakers. He wore a sharp suit, tailored perfectly, his shoes polished to a shine. The bruise on his jaw was almost gone, but his eyes carried a new fire. He didn't look like a man humiliated, he looked like a man in charge. The employees froze. The security guards shifted uncomfortably, remembering the way they had dragged him out just days ago. Customers stopped mid-conversation, their heads turning toward him in disbelief. Whispers filled the room. That's him. It's Big Shaq. He came back. The manager stormed out of his office, his face already twisted with anger. You again? He barked, his voice trembling. I told you never to set foot in here again. Get out but before he could finish, Shaq raised his hand, calm and commanding. And behind him, two men in business suits stepped forward, carrying thick folders and legal documents. Shaq spoke for the first time in public since the incident. His voice was steady, deep, and filled with authority. I'm not here as a customer, he said, pausing just long enough for the words to sink in. I'm here as the new owner. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, and cries filled the air. Phones shot up instantly, recording every second of this unbelievable twist. The staff turned pale, their jaws dropping. Even the customers couldn't believe what they had just heard. The manager laughed, but it wasn't the laugh of a confident man, it was shaky, desperate. Owner, don't make me laugh. This is a multi-million-dollar dealership. You think someone like you, Shaq, cut him off with a simple gesture? One of the suited men handed the manager a document. Here are the papers, Shaq said firmly. Signed, sealed. Approved as of today, this dealership belongs to me. The manager's face drained of color as he scanned the documents. The company's logo, the signatures, the stamps, it was all real. His hands trembled as the truth sank in. Big Shaq, the man he had punched and thrown out, now owned everything in the showroom. The cars, the staff, even his job. The crowd outside erupted into cheers as the news spread instantly online. The clip of Shaq declaring ownership shot across social media like lightning. Hashtags exploded again. Hashtag Shaq takes over. Hashtag from victim to owner. Hashtag respect one. Shaq walked slowly across the showroom floor, every step echoing like thunder. He stopped right in front of the manager, his eyes steady, his voice low but powerful. Respect is priceless. You tried to take mine away, now I'm taking yours. The manager stuttered, his pride shattering in front of everyone. Before he could speak, Shaq delivered the final blow, not with his fists, but with words. You're fired. The room went silent. Then, in an instant, applause erupted from both customers and staff. People cheered, clapped, and shouted Shaq's name. Even employees who had been afraid before now smiled with relief. The man who had ruled them with arrogance was gone, and the one who replaced him had earned their respect. The manager tried to argue, shouting, "You can't do this to me." But security this time, under Shaq's command, escorted him out the same glass doors where Shaq had once been humiliated. The poetic justice was undeniable. Shaq turned back to the crowd, his voice strong. "Oh, this dealership will no longer be a place of arrogance and disrespect. From today, it will be a place of honesty, fairness, and dignity. No one will ever walk through these doors and be treated the way I was treated." Cameras flashed, people clapped louder, and within minutes, the video of his speech spread across the world. Headlines exploded. Man beaten at dealership returns as the owner. Big Shaq fires manager who assaulted him. From humiliation to victory, the story inspiring millions. Shaq stood tall at the entrance, shaking hands with employees, smiling at customers, his presence commanding but kind. He had transformed humiliation into triumph, silence into power, and pain into legacy. The world wasn't just watching anymore, they were celebrating. And as the crowd cheered his name, Shaq knew one thing. This was only the beginning. His stunning move hadn't just shocked the dealership, had inspired millions to believe that respect, once denied, could always be reclaimed. Asterisk. The dealership was alive with noise, applause, cheers, and the sound of cameras flashing non-stop. Employees who once felt powerless now stood straighter, their faces bright with relief. Customers clapped, some even shouting Shaq's name as if he were a hero in a movie. The man who had been thrown out just days ago now stood at the very center. Not as a victim, but as the leader everyone respected. Big Shaq let the noise settle before raising his hand. The room slowly quieted. His eyes scanned the crowd, employees, customers, reporters, and strangers who had come just to see history unfold. Then, with a calm but steady voice, he began to speak. 3 days ago, he said, "I walked into this dealership with a dream. I wanted to buy a car, nothing more. But instead of being treated with respect, I was insulted, punched, and dragged out like I didn't belong. That moment could have broken me, but instead, it pushed me to rise." The crowd listened in silence. Every word seemed to echo louder than the last. Shaq continued, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "Respect is not about money. It's not about clothes. It's not about status. Respect is something every human deserves, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what they look like. When that manager tried to take mine away, I promised myself one thing. I would never let him decide my worth." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Some employees wiped tears from their eyes, touched by the truth in his words. Customers nodded, knowing they had witnessed something unforgettable. Shaq took a deep breath and looked directly into the cameras. "This dealership is mine now, but it doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to everyone who walks through those doors. From today, no one will be judged here. No one will be insulted or humiliated. This place will stand for fairness, dignity, and respect. That's the true luxury more valuable than any car you see on this floor." The crowd erupted in applause. Again, but this time it wasn't just noise. It was a release of emotion, a shared belief in the lesson he had just spoken. Reporters scribbled furiously, already crafting headlines that would travel the globe. Outside, people gathered in the street, holding signs that read, "Respect for all," and "Shaq showed us the way." His story had spread so far, it was no longer just about one dealership. It had become a symbol, a movement, proof that dignity could win even in the face of humiliation. Shaq smiled as he looked at the faces around him. He didn't see strangers anymore. He saw people who had been with him through the storm, who had watched him fall and then rise stronger than before. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just his victory. It was everyone's. He ended with one final line, a sentence that would be replayed in countless videos, quoted in articles and remembered by millions. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Stand tall even when they push you down. Because one day, your silence, your strength, and your patience will become the answer that shocks them all. The room erupted into cheers, louder than ever before. Reporters rushed to broadcast the words. Influencers repeated them online, and within hours, the quote trended worldwide. People wrote it on posters, shared it in captions, and whispered it as motivation to themselves. As the celebration continued, Shaq stepped back for a moment, watching the joy around him. He remembered the pain of being shoved, the sting of the punch, and the humiliation of being dragged out. But now, those memories didn't hurt. They reminded him of how far he had come. What was once a wound had turned into a scar of victory, proof of a battle he had won not with fists, but with dignity. Later that evening, Shaq walked out of the dealership, the cool night air brushing against his face. The crowd outside cheered again, holding up their phones to capture every second. He gave them a wave, a small but warm smile, then slipped into his car, the very car he had once dreamed of owning. The engine roared to life, but this time it wasn't just the sound of a machine. It was the sound of triumph, of a man who had turned humiliation into history. And as he drove away under the city lights, people whispered the lesson he had left behind. His story would not be forgotten. It would live on as a reminder that respect is not given by power or money. It is demanded by dignity and earned through patience. Big Shaq had been punched, thrown out, and humiliated. But his next move truly stunned the world.